I'm Sergeant Santos, U.S. Army medic, sir. Our unit was on a training exercise and unfortunately got lost.
The GPS died a few miles.
10 female medics stumbled upon Veterans Forest Clinic. What he'd been doing alone will shock you. The GPS died 3 miles into the Appalachian wilderness, but Staff Sergeant Maria Santos pressed forward with her 10-woman medical training unit. They were hunting for their extraction point when the smell hit them antiseptic and pine needles impossible in the middle of nowhere. Then they heard the generator humming. Dr. Samuel "Doc" Morrison had been officially dead for 20 years, his military record sealed after a mission gone wrong in Somalia. But in this hidden valley surrounded by surgical equipment older than his patients, he'd found a different kind of war to fight. One patient at a time, one life at a time. What the medics discovered would challenge everything they knew about military service, civilian medicine, and the meaning of the Hippocratic Oath. Because sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who disappear from history to serve in the shadows. The Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, October 2024. Hidden in a valley accessible only by forgotten logging roads, Doc Morrison's clinic occupied a natural clearing surrounded by centuries-old oaks. The facility looked like a field hospital. From another era canvas tents connected by wooden walkways, solar panels, jury-rigged to power generators, and medical equipment that belonged in a museum but functioned flawlessly. The nearest town was Millfield Population 847, where folks paid for medical care in venison, firewood, and homemade preserves. The county hospital was 90 miles away on mountain roads that became impassable in winter. For 2 decades, this hidden sanctuary had served as the only reliable medical care for scattered communities throughout the hollers and ridges, treating everything from broken bones to difficult births to chronic conditions that would have been death sentences without intervention. Captain Samuel Morrison had been a Special Forces medic in Somalia when his convoy was ambushed in 1994. The official report listed him as KIA, but the truth was classified. He'd been captured, tortured, and held for 8 months before escaping. The psychological trauma left him unable to return to conventional military life, while his medical expertise had been honed by treating combat wounds under impossible conditions. He'd seen too much death, saved too many lives under fire to settle for the bureaucratic constraints of civilian medicine. The woods called to him as a place where he could heal both others and himself. For 20 years, Doc had lived off the grid his death, allowing him to practice medicine without licenses, regulations, or insurance companies. His patients included subsistence farmers, off-grid survivalists, undocumented workers, and anyone else who fell through the cracks of the healthcare system. He'd delivered over 300 babies, performed countless surgeries, and created a network of trust that extended throughout the mountain communities. His supplies came from expired donations, veterinary suppliers, and a black market network of sympathetic medical professionals. The isolation had been his medicine, but it had also been his prison. Doc possessed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose and treat conditions with minimal equipment, a skill developed through years of combat medicine and resource scarcity. His surgical techniques were unconventional, but effective, adapted to work with whatever materials were available. He'd trained several local women as paramedics, creating an informal medical network that could handle emergencies when he wasn't available. His reputation in the mountains was legendary. Families would walk 20 miles through snow to bring him their sick children. This folk hero status would prove crucial when the outside world finally discovered his sanctuary. Doc's greatest fear wasn't discovery, it was what would happen to his patients if the government shut down his operation. 20 years of service had created dependencies that official medicine couldn't replace. The mountain communities trusted him in ways they'd never trust government doctors or big city hospitals. His unlicensed practice was technically illegal, but it was also irreplaceable. The conflict between his desire to remain hidden and his responsibility to his patients had been manageable until now. But change was coming, whether he wanted it or not. The 10 female medics approaching his clinic represented everything he'd tried to escape: military structure, official oversight, and the possibility that his decades of secret service would be exposed to a world that might not understand his choices. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been leading training exercises for 15 years, but nothing had prepared her for the sight that greeted her team in the mountain clearing. The medical facility was sophisticated beyond anything she'd seen in combat zones. Surgical suites with backup power, a pharmacy stocked with medications worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and recovery wards that looked more like a civilian hospital than a forest clinic. The man who emerged from the main tent carried himself with the bearing of a career soldier despite his civilian clothes and graying beard. "Ladies, you're trespassing on private property," he said calmly, but his eyes were calculating their weapons, their positioning, their intent. Santos recognized the assessment of a combat veteran, the automatic threat evaluation that never stopped. "Sir, I'm Staff Sergeant Santos, U.S. Army Medical Corps. We're conducting a training exercise and got lost." The lie came easily, but she could tell he didn't believe it. The tension stretched until a voice called from one of the tents, "Doc, is everything okay?" The title confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't just a survivalist with medical training. This was someone who'd been practicing medicine at a professional level for a very long time. Doc's mind raced through contingencies he'd rehearsed for 20 years. The arrival of military medics could mean his operation was blown, that someone had finally connected the dots between his death and the mysterious mountain doctor who'd been treating the local population. His first instinct was to activate the emergency protocols he'd established, with the local families scatter the equipment, destroy the records, disappear into the mountains until the heat died down. But as he watched the 10 women, he saw something that made him hesitate: genuine curiosity rather than suspicion, professional interest rather than enforcement intent. Santos approached him with a respectful distance of one medic to another, her questions focused on his setup rather than his identity. "Sir, this is an impressive facility. Are you a doctor?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Doc had been Samuel Morrison for 20 years, but he'd been Doc for even longer. The identity felt more real than any name on military records. His response would determine everything that followed: whether these women became allies or enemies, whether his secret would be protected or exposed. The local families depended on him, but they also trusted his judgment. If he could convince these medics that his work was valuable, maybe they'd become part of the solution rather than the problem. Doc's decision to trust the medics began with a simple gesture. He invited them to observe his afternoon clinic. The first patient was Martha Hendricks, a 70-year-old woman with diabetes, whose insulin Doc had been managing for 5 years. The second was a 6-year-old boy with asthma whose inhaler prescriptions came from Doc's carefully maintained pharmacy. The third was a pregnant woman whose prenatal care had been handled entirely by Doc's informal network. Santos and her team watched in amazement as Doc worked with equipment that should have been in a museum but functioned perfectly using techniques that bridged military field medicine and civilian care. His bedside manner was gentle but authoritative, his diagnoses quick but thorough. The local families treated him with a reverence that went beyond medical care. He was their lifeline to health and survival. By the end of the afternoon, the medics understood that they weren't witnessing illegal practice, but essential service. Doc had filled a gap that the official medical system couldn't or wouldn't address. The question now was whether the outside world would see his work as heroic or criminal. The radio brought news that chilled Doc's blood. A strange illness was spreading through the mountain communities, affecting children and elderly residents with severe respiratory symptoms. The county health department was overwhelmed, and the CDC was still days away from responding. Doc had seen similar symptoms during his time in Somalia, but he needed confirmation before taking action. Santos and her team offered to help with initial assessments, their military training, allowing them to establish systematic protocols for patient evaluation. The partnership began out of necessity, but it quickly revealed the scope of Doc's operation and the trust he'd built with the local population. The illness spread faster than anyone expected, with entire families falling sick within hours of each other. Doc's initial diagnosis was confirmed by blood tests he'd managed to run on his limited equipment, a bacterial infection that was resistant to common antibiotics, but treatable with the right combination of medications. The problem was, scale his clinic could handle a few dozen patients, but the outbreak was affecting hundreds of people across multiple communities. Santos recognized the situation as a public health emergency that required military-level coordination and resources. The medics' training exercise became a real-world deployment as they worked to contain the spread while treating the sick. The crisis peaked when the main road to the county hospital washed out during a flash flood, leaving Doc's clinic as the only medical facility accessible to most of the affected communities. The 10 medics found themselves working around the clock alongside Doc, their modern equipment, complementing his improvised but effective setup. The situation forced them to confront the reality that this unlicensed, technically illegal medical practice was providing better care than the official system could offer. Their reports back to command would determine whether Doc's operation was protected or shut down, whether his 20 years of service would be honored or prosecuted. The CDC's arrival complicated everything. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the lead epidemiologist, was horrified by what she saw as a completely unregulated medical facility, operating without oversight or proper protocols. Her initial assessment was that Doc's clinic was a public health hazard that needed immediate closure. The political implications were staggering. If word got out that an unlicensed practitioner had been providing medical care for 20 years, the liability issues alone would destroy careers and budgets. State health officials demanded answers about how this situation had been allowed to develop, while federal authorities began investigating the legal implications of Doc's practice. The media attention threatened to expose not just Doc's operation, but the broader failures of the rural healthcare system. Santos found herself caught between her military chain of command, which wanted the situation contained, and her growing conviction that Doc's work was too valuable to destroy. The 10 medics became unofficial advocates for the clinic, their reports emphasizing the quality of care and the community's dependence on Doc's services. The external pressure was building toward a confrontation that would determine whether Doc's hidden service would be recognized or criminalized. Under extreme pressure, Doc began to emerge from 20 years of isolation, his leadership skills adapting to coordinate a response that combined military precision with civilian medical care. His work alongside the 10 medics reminded him of the collaborative medicine he'd practiced in the military, the satisfaction of working with a team that understood both the mission and the stakes. Santos and her team discovered that their military training had prepared them for exactly this type of crisis, unconventional medicine in resource-limited environments where improvisation and adaptation were more valuable than textbook procedures. The collaboration transformed both sides. Doc gained access to modern equipment and techniques he'd been isolated from, while the medics learned field medicine approaches that no classroom could teach. Doc's patient interactions revealed the depth of his connection to the mountain communities, his understanding of their culture, their needs, and their fears. The crisis forced him to confront his own motivations. Was he hiding from the world, or was he serving it in the only way he knew how? The answer would determine whether he continued his secret practice or found a way to bridge the gap between his hidden service and official recognition. The signs of approaching catastrophe multiplied as the outbreak spread beyond the mountain communities to the broader region. Doc's informal network of patients and helpers was being overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis. While official medical authorities struggled to coordinate a response to an epidemic they didn't understand. The CDC's investigation was uncovering the full scope of Doc's operation, not just his clinic, but the network of trained locals who'd been providing basic medical care throughout the mountains for 2 decades. The legal implications were staggering, with potential charges ranging from practicing medicine without a license to federal tax violations. The 10 medics found themselves in an impossible position. Their duty to report what they discovered conflicted with their recognition that Doc's work was saving lives. The outbreak was approaching a tipping point where either Doc's expertise would be officially recognized and utilized, or his operation would be shut down just when it was most needed. The mountain communities were beginning to understand that their medical lifeline was under threat, their trust in Doc extending to protection of his sanctuary. The crisis was building toward a confrontation that would force everyone involved to choose between regulations and results, between official authority and moral imperative. The call came at 3 a.m. from the state's emergency management director. The bacterial infection had spread to Richmond, affecting government officials, hospital workers, and thousands of civilians. The pathogen was unlike anything in the CDC's databases, but Doc recognized it immediately from his time in Somalia. The same strain that had killed civilians in refugee camps was now spreading through Virginia's population centers, mutated and more virulent than before. Official medical authorities were helpless, their conventional treatments failing against the adapted bacteria. Doc's knowledge of the pathogen's behavior, its treatment protocols, and its prevention methods was the only thing standing between the region and a full-scale epidemic. The irony was bitter. The man who'd been hiding from official medicine for 20 years was now the only person who could save it. But the authorities were still focused on his legal status rather than his expertise. Dr. Chen demanded that Doc be arrested for practicing medicine without a license, even as her own team struggled to understand the pathogen he'd been treating successfully for weeks. The CDC's bureaucratic response was measured in committee meetings and protocol reviews, while people died from a disease that Doc knew how to cure. The 10 medics found themselves in the impossible position of watching their chain of command ignore the solution because it came from an unauthorized source. The outbreak was accelerating beyond anyone's ability to control it through conventional means, and Doc's clinic was the only place where patients were consistently recovering. Doc faced the choice that had been building for 20 years: remain hidden and let people die, or reveal himself and risk everything he'd built. The mountain communities depended on his continued service, but thousands of lives hung in the balance across the region. His expertise with the pathogen was hard-won from combat experience that no civilian doctor could replicate, but using it would expose him to prosecution and destroy his sanctuary. The CDC's demands for his arrest were being supported by state officials who saw him as a liability rather than a resource. Dr. Chen's position was clear: Doc's unlicensed practice was dangerous and illegal, regardless of his success rate. The 10 medics tried to advocate for him, but their voices were being drowned out by bureaucratic concerns about liability and protocol. Santos made the difficult decision to contact her commanding officer, directly bypassing the chain of command, to explain the situation to someone who might understand the military context of Doc's actions. The response was swift and decisive. Doc's service record was declassified, revealing him to be a decorated Special Forces medic who'd been presumed dead for 20 years. The revelation changed everything, but it also raised new questions about why he'd stayed hidden and whether his informal practice could be legitimized. The weight of 20 years of Secret Service pressed down on him as he considered whether to step forward or disappear deeper into the mountains. The choice would determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone affected by the epidemic. Doc's decision crystallized when he saw Santos preparing to make a stand that would end her career. The young medic was ready to disobey orders and risk court-martial to protect his operation, the same kind of moral courage that had driven him into the mountains 20 years earlier. "Sergeant, stand down," he said quietly, his voice carrying command authority for the first time in 2 decades. "I'll handle this." Doc walked to his radio and made the call that would change everything: a direct communication to the Pentagon using codes that hadn't been active since Somalia. The response was immediate and electric. "Doc Morrison, this is command. We've been looking for you for 20 years. The conversation that followed was brief but transformative. Doc provided his location, confirmed his identity, and requested immediate medical support for the epidemic response. Within hours, military medical teams were airlifted to his clinic, not to arrest him, but to learn from him. The hidden practitioner became the lead consultant for the regional response, his mountain sanctuary transformed into the command center for epidemic containment. The 20 years of Secret Service were finally acknowledged, his expertise officially recognized, and his dedication to healing validated by the system he'd left behind. The military medical response was unprecedented in its scope and speed. Doc's clinic became the staging area for a multi-agency operation that included Army medics, CDC specialists, state health officials, and local volunteers. The 10 female medics who discovered his sanctuary were assigned as liaison officers, their knowledge of his operation and the local communities making them invaluable coordinators. Doc's 20 years of patient records were digitized and analyzed, revealing patterns and treatment protocols that transformed understanding of rural medicine and epidemic response. His informal network of trained locals was officially recognized and incorporated into the response structure, their years of experience providing crucial support for the massive influx of personnel and equipment. The mountain communities, initially suspicious of the government involvement, were reassured by Doc's continued presence and the medics' respectful approach to their culture and concerns. The clinic's capacity was expanded tenfold within 48 hours, with military field hospitals establishing treatment centers throughout the affected region. Doc's improvised equipment was replaced with state-of-the-art medical technology, but his protocols and procedures remained the foundation of the treatment approach. The coordination between military precision and civilian medical care created a model that would influence emergency response procedures for years to come. The epidemic reached its peak just as the medical response was fully deployed, testing every system and protocol that had been hastily established. Doc found himself in the impossible position of treating patients while coordinating a response that spanned multiple states and involved thousands of personnel. The pathogen showed signs of mutation, requiring constant adjustment of treatment protocols based on Doc's historical knowledge and real-time laboratory analysis. The 10 medics worked around the clock, their initial training exercise having evolved into the medical deployment of their careers. The mountain communities were overwhelmed by the sudden influx of medical personnel and equipment, their quiet valleys transformed into bustling treatment centers. The media attention was intense, with reporters struggling to understand how an unlicensed practitioner had become the key to stopping a regional epidemic. Doc's identity was gradually revealed, his presumed death in Somalia explained, and his 20 years of secret service celebrated as heroic rather than criminal. The tension peaked when the treatment centers reached capacity, forcing difficult decisions about resource allocation and patient priority. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Failure meant the epidemic would spread beyond the region, while success would validate Doc's unconventional approach to medicine and community service. The breakthrough came when Doc's treatment protocols proved effective against the mutated pathogen. His understanding of the bacteria's behavior, allowing him to adjust medications and procedures faster than traditional research methods could accommodate. The success rate in his clinic exceeded 95%, compared to less than 60% in conventional hospitals, validating 20 years of field medicine and improvised care. The 10 medics documented every procedure, every protocol adjustment, every successful treatment, creating a comprehensive record of unconventional medicine that worked when conventional medicine failed. Doc's patient interactions revealed the depth of trust he'd built with the mountain communities, their willingness to follow his instructions even when they conflicted with official recommendations. The collaboration between military medics and civilian patients created a model of care that bridged the gap between battlefield medicine and community health. The epidemic response became a showcase for the effectiveness of decentralized medical care with Doc's clinic, serving as proof that quality healthcare could exist outside traditional institutional structures. The crisis deepened when federal authorities attempted to take control of the response, their bureaucratic procedures conflicting with the flexible, adaptive approach that had been working. Dr. Chen's insistence on standard protocols threatened to undermine the treatment success, while CDC regulations would have shut down many of Doc's most effective procedures. The 10 medics found themselves defending unconventional medicine against conventional authority, their reports emphasizing results over regulations. The mountain communities rallied around Doc, their loyalty creating political pressure that supported his continued leadership of the response. The media coverage intensified the debate about medical licensing and rural healthcare, with Doc's success challenging fundamental assumptions about professional credentials and institutional authority. The legal questions about his practice remained unresolved, but the epidemic had made them temporarily irrelevant. The success of his treatment protocols was undeniable, but the implications for medical regulation and professional licensing were staggering. The conflict between results and regulations reached a crescendo as the epidemic peaked, forcing everyone involved to choose between saving lives and following rules. The decisive moment came when the governor of Virginia arrived at Doc's clinic not to arrest him, but to thank him for saving the state from epidemic disaster. The political calculation was clear. Doc's success had made him untouchable, his results more important than his credentials. The governor's public endorsement of Doc's work validated 20 years of Secret Service and provided political cover for the legal issues surrounding his practice. The 10 medics stood beside him as he received official recognition for his service, their discovery of his clinic having led to the greatest medical success story in the region's history. The moment was both personal and political, acknowledging Doc's individual dedication while raising broader questions about healthcare access and medical regulation. The governor's announcement that Doc would be offered a state position as emergency medical coordinator was the culmination of his journey from hidden practitioner to public hero. The recognition came with conditions. Doc would need to obtain proper licensing and work within official medical structures, but it also came with guarantees that his mountain clinic would be preserved and his community-based approach would be supported. The final breakthrough came when Doc accepted the state position while negotiating terms that would protect his mountain practice and the communities he'd served for 20 years. The agreement established his clinic as an official rural health center with funding and support that would allow him to expand his services while maintaining his connection to the local population. The 10 medics who discovered his sanctuary were assigned to work with him, their military training complementing his field experience to create a new model of rural healthcare. The success of the epidemic response had proven that unconventional medicine could work when it was based on genuine expertise and community trust. Doc's story became a symbol of the potential for innovation in healthcare, showing how individual dedication could create solutions that institutions couldn't imagine. The recognition of his service validated not just his medical skills, but his understanding of community needs and his commitment to serving populations that had been forgotten by mainstream medicine. The hidden practitioner had become a public hero, his 20 years of Secret Service finally acknowledged and celebrated. The immediate consequences were transformative for both Doc and the 10 medics who discovered his sanctuary. Doc's official appointment as State Emergency Medical Coordinator came with full licensing and legal protection for his past practice. The Mountain Clinic was designated as a model rural health center with federal funding and university partnerships that would ensure its continued operation. The 10 medics were commended for their role in the discovery and response, their careers advanced by their association with the successful epidemic response. The local communities celebrated the recognition of their beloved doc, while welcoming the additional resources and support that came with official status. Doc's transition from hidden practitioner to official medical coordinator transformed rural healthcare throughout the region. His clinic became a teaching hospital for military medics and civilian doctors, with his protocols and procedures becoming standard practice for epidemic response. The 10 female medics who discovered his sanctuary were assigned to permanent positions at the clinic, their military training enhanced by Doc's field medicine expertise. The mountain communities gained access to modern medical equipment and specialists while maintaining their connection to the practitioner who'd served them for 20 years. The epidemic response became a case study in unconventional medicine, with Doc's success challenging traditional assumptions about medical licensing and institutional authority. Federal funding for rural health centers increased dramatically, inspired by the success of Doc's community-based approach. The legal precedent established by his case provided protection for other practitioners serving underserved populations. The collaboration between military and civilian medicine created new models for emergency response that would influence policy for decades. The Morrison model of rural healthcare became a template for medical practice in underserved areas across the country. Doc's approach to community-based care, combining military field medicine with civilian health services, influenced medical school curricula and residency programs. His clinic attracted researchers and practitioners from around the world, eager to study the integration of formal and informal medical networks. The success of the epidemic response led to policy changes that recognized the value of unconventional medical practice when it was based on genuine expertise and community trust. The 10 medics who'd worked with Doc became advocates for military-civilian medical collaboration, their careers shaped by the experience of serving in his clinic. The mountain communities maintained their special relationship with Doc, while benefiting from increased access to modern medical resources. The legal framework established by his case provided protection for other practitioners serving vulnerable populations, particularly in rural and remote areas. His story inspired a new generation of medical professionals to consider service in underserved communities, showing that meaningful practice could exist outside traditional institutional structures. The integration of military precision and civilian care created lasting improvements in emergency response capabilities. Doc's journey from hidden practitioner to public hero required courage that surpassed his military service. His acceptance of official recognition, while maintaining his commitment to community-based care, demonstrated the possibility of bridging institutional and personal medicine. The 20 years of Secret Service were validated by their results, showing that healing could happen in any setting when guided by genuine expertise and compassion. His relationship with the 10 medics who discovered his sanctuary evolved into lasting professional partnerships that enriched both military and civilian medicine. The transformation from isolation to integration proved that service took many forms and that sometimes the greatest impact came from the quietest dedication. Doc's story proved that healing knows no boundaries, that service takes many forms, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who serve in silence until circumstances force them into the light, where their dedication can inspire others.